So just to recap on what I announced in the last satsang, is that today will be the last weekly or bi-weekly, twice weekly satsang for about the next month. I won't do satsangs or one-on-one sessions for the next month. And then we'll look to see how we go forward. I'm guessing it'll probably be one a week on the Saturday, but that's yet to be confirmed. I also wanted to let people know that I do see the comments that come through. I don't really have energy to respond to all of the comments online because there's just too many different forums through which the comments come through, but I do read them all. And understand that I can't reply, but the fact that you don't get a reply doesn't mean that doesn't mean anything in particular other than I can't respond to everything. Otherwise, it becomes a bit imbalanced. And also for anyone who did contribute financially last year, those are also very much appreciated, and I see all of the contributions that come through and note their receivable, but I don't I don't respond directly to them, but also understand that when they come through, I do get notifications and appreciate that. So it's very kind of those that did send something through. So today's topic is going to be a bit varied. There's 2 or 3 different points that I'd like to raise. One of them is to talk more about the self, and not just talk about it, because when we come to talking about the self, and this would be self with a capital S, so denoting something more true, something that has been overlooked, moved into the background, and is the key to being in life in a different way, and in a way that is less invested in the past, invested in the future, and invested in the actual outcomes that are happening now. So the connection to self actually requires simultaneously a changing in the way that our cognitive function works. And so I'm going to suggest how maybe over the next month it's appropriate for that to be something that whenever the thought arises, there could be a dropping into this place of being if some of the pointers that I put forward tonight hit home. There are, and this ties in with meditation. I often talk about meditation as a practice, and because I don't think that we should necessarily, it's not for everyone, and it can become a problem if meditation is a practice, a doing. So when I use the word practice, it depends on how the word is being used. If it's something that spontaneously happens and it happens regularly, someone could say, well, I practice meditation regularly. Just as if someone does yoga, and it may be that they do yoga every day, but they really only do it when they feel like it, when it feels appropriate. And the attitude behind the activity is what is most important, because you can have an attitude that says, I am doing this, and I need to be the best, and I need this outcome, which means there is a practicer doing the practice. And any of these spiritual practices, at their early stages, by default, there is a practicer. because that's what life puts in place. Life develops a practicer, which is the doer, the one that thinks they are making things happen and is living life in order to get somewhere, to get outcomes. And so when someone goes into a spiritual practice, what structure is going in is this belief in doership. And so therefore the activity is approached with the attitude of doership, like I have to do this for this long each day so that I become great at it, or so that I get somewhere over time. And that attitude usually means that within the practice there is an ongoing movement of thought, because the one that enters the activity like that is obsessive, incessant thought, and doesn't know how to stop. And be and know themselves as existing even when the thinking isn't active. And we only get to stop and know ourselves even when the thinking isn't active when the thinking identity actually dissolves. And it doesn't, I don't mean it necessarily dissolves forever, never to come back, but when there is a movement that has started happening in the movement, there is a movement away from the psychological identity, the thinking, the trying to get somewhere, to a more innate, a more fundamental, a more true, we could use the word true, aspect of the human being, a deeper aspect, an aspect that's always been there. It's the very aspect that allows us or creates the sense, even for the psychological self, that I am here. And then when the psychological self is that structure is present, all of the thinking wraps itself around the sense of I am, and it, for all intents and purposes, feels like it's the psychological self that is. But it's only because the psychological self, which is all the outward movement, the attitude of doership and attachment, that has wrapped itself around the primal I am. And so when that thinking stops, what is left is the I am, the sense of I am here. Not I am as such and such, but just an undeniable, though it's not a conceptual I am here, it is a feeling. And so in order for that sense, that feeling, that direct experience, that direct knowing to reveal itself, we have to come right down into the present, which is where that sense is. And any thinking tends to take us away from the present. So, and that thinking that takes us away from the present has become so habitual because it was needed in the early stages of development. It was needed in order to format the intellect. So just the learning of language and understanding the world required the intellect to be engaged. So it's a funny thing, is we can't say, oh, I wish that never happened. I wish the psychological self and the engagement of thinking, or rather, we couldn't say I wish the engagement of the intellect never happened, because sure, the psychological self wouldn't develop, but then the biological self wouldn't happen either. So it's really a case of something having sort of gone a little bit overboard. And it's not so much about we don't want it to ever have happened, but the spiritual seeking essentially is, the spiritual process is about correcting some of the overboardness. And when I say when the psychological thinking stops, what is left, the psychological thinking that has wrapped itself around the core I amness, what's left is the I am. That is what's left in meditation, because the biological aspects also tend to fade away in a meditation, especially a closed eye meditation, because in the closed eye meditation, the world that exists is not a world of form. It's not the daily living world, because firstly, the senses, in particular the eyes, have shut down. And so there is no picking up of an external world of form. And if there is an inward focus on the emptiness, such that it becomes a single focused awareness inward, even the senses such as sound, for all intents and purposes, shut down, in that we become unaware of what is going on the external. So in some of the yogic practices, that is referred to as sense withdrawal. And it is sense withdrawal because attention is so focused inwards that even though sounds might be there, they don't get projected into the inner space. And so in that inner space that isn't a dimension of form and daily living, there is no body, there is no physical world or physical body. And even the thinking, the self-referencing who I am based on a memory of who I was 5 minutes ago, which may have included 5 minutes ago the world of form, even thinking along those lines, when the focus is very one-pointed in the inner direction, focused on the world of non-form, then any thinking about form is essentially a leftover from the world of form. And if we realize that, and it is happening, then it's just a reminder that the focus isn't on the present, isn't on what is right there in the meditation. And that's what I want to point out, is how we can possibly bring attention to the inner space, to the world that is not of form, and continually repeat if we find ourselves drifting out of it. Because if some of these habits essentially aren't pointed out, they carry on, and we don't even know that they're happening, because we don't know that they're, let's say, bad habits as far as presence or feeling self, knowing self is concerned. We don't know that they're bad habits. They've been put in place. We think they're harmless. Sometimes the functions that I'm speaking about are very subconscious, very subliminal, and they are essentially residual senses of self, residual senses of the world that we live in, which are carried into the meditation. And if that happens, if they're carried into the meditation, they affect the meditation. They influence the quality of the meditation. They influence the quality of the experience that arises. And what I mean by that is the experience that arises may be an experience where essentially ideas of who we are that are very linked to the psychological self carry on. And so when those movements start being recognized and cut off, moved away from, the inner meditation space can change quality significantly. And this is a muscle, essentially, that needs to be strengthened. The resting in I am, the resting in as self, capital S, the knowing oneself directly. And when I say oneself, it's I'm referring to what we will hopefully see as a more true and basic, more fundamental component of the human being. So, as an adjunct to this exploration of self, so that was a long introduction. Maybe that was half the topic. The next half of that topic is to do a little guided meditation in a way, and suggest some of the things that get in the way of us transcending the thinking, dropping deeper into the core of who we are, the formless knowing of oneself as something that is, not something that we think into existence, but something that we realize in the moment. There's a realization, oh, I am this. And what this is not particularly defined, but it's undeniable. And it's undeniably what I am. And what we find is it's very different to the sense of who we have always known ourselves to be, because that sense of who we've always known ourselves to be has been very much related to the world of form. And the inner, the aspect of the human that I sometimes refer to as the quantum aspect, and it's got really not so much to do with quantum, except I use the word quantum because it's the world of the micro, the world that doesn't follow the rules of form. That aspect of ourself is the aspect that is most valuable, really, in terms of peace of mind, and is most underappreciated and overlooked. I think people tend to like or want to know some of the things that happened for me, and so tying in with this topic, I was on a call yesterday, and the topic was about how we can sometimes relate to spirituality as a sort of segment of our life. So you've got work, you've got relationship, you've got friends, you have sports, and spirituality can be another section, your hobbies, whatever, and we tend to look at it, oh, now I need to dedicate some time to spirituality. And if that's the way we look at it, what happens is that, let's say you spend 25% of your, let's say, pie chart, and 25% of the pie chart is spirituality. That means 75% of the time you're not thinking or relating to the world as if it is spirituality. You're relating to it as if it's work, as if it's sport, as if it's relationship. And so then what might happen is we get the sense of, oh, I've sort of been lost for 75% of my day because I've been involved in all these other activities. And when we hear something like continuous unbroken peace of mind or resting in being, and we say, oh, I'm not doing very well because I only spend 25% or 15% of my week or day in the spirit. And maybe someone thinks that they need to increase that slice. So when I was having this conversation, it made me think about my process, because it's very revealing. Someone describes how things are for them, and in the description, a lot is sort of revealed that I might I might not appreciate the difference of how the journey unfolds. So I look back and I thought, oh, this is interesting, because when I started seeking, and I heard about spirituality and started reading about the descriptions and whatever. It luckily wasn't interpreted as a subtopic of life, but rather very clear that spirituality is talking about all of life, which then means that if we approach it like this, so I mention this because we simply may not process it like that, not through any fault of our own, but we're used to engaging in practices. And, we have work, we go to work, and that's work. And we go to do sports, and that's sports. And then we sit down and watch satsang, and that's spirituality. And I guess that it can carry on like that for years, if that's how it's been processed, if that's what it's deemed to be about. And so I figure it's worth mentioning that when I came across this, it was evident that it was talking about an attitude to all of life, a relation. Spirituality is describing how we live all aspects of life, and so it's not a separate component. So what that means is that if it's processed that way, any activity that is happening becomes an opportunity to be understood relative to whatever concepts have been absorbed as part of the time you spend specifically listening to the concepts, which would be your spirituality segment when you're actually doing that activity. But the whole point is for what is absorbed to then come in and be seen in the other aspects of life. So when I thought about it, I realized that essentially 24 hours a day, or it can't be 24 hours because some of it was deep sleep, but in the waking state, everything that was happening through me, whether it was walking in the park, whether it's driving, whether it was talking to someone, was continually being seen as the happening of life, and the concepts, whatever concept was valid based on what had been absorbed, was being applied to the very situation. So, for example, if I was making breakfast and I knocked over a glass of orange juice, for example, that occurrence was accompanied by a narrative which was essentially, we could say, a form of contemplation, because it's a narrative not of the thinking mind, but of the working mind or of the contemplating mind. And it was accompanied by a narrative not of, oh, that was a silly thing to do, or, you're so clumsy. If that narrative was there, then overlooking both the knocking over of the glass of orange juice and the other narrative, if the other narrative was there, was looking at it and saying, oh, that's pain in the moment. That is destiny unfolding. That's God's will that the story was written for my hand to knock over the orange juice. And if there was guilt or shame or anger or whatever, that would, if it was biological anger, the narrative would be, and that's biological anger in relation to the pain in the moment. If it wasn't biological anger and it was blame for someone who had left the glass on the edge or something like that, then the narrative would be, and there is an attitude of personal doership and an attitude of attachment to outcomes. And it wasn't so much, and my experience was that a reminding of myself to come back to spirituality wasn't something where when I sat down and, my 25% of the day on, as is the case for some people, and you come in and you realize, oh, I didn't remember often the day, to look at it from a spiritual point of view. I mean, and even this word spiritual, it's just a word, really. I actually don't think it's that appropriate to look at it from a spiritual point of view. It makes it sound some sort of elitist or something like that. But what it's really meant is look at it with different eyes. And so as soon as that starts to set in, that what we call spirituality is really about a different way of seeing life, then anything that happens triggers automatically a reframing or automatic reminder that accompanies that event. And that is the narrative that puts it into context. And the context could be anything. It's pick something. Someone, said they're going to pick you up and they don't pick you up. It's pain in the moment. It's destiny. If there is anger in relation to it, a biological reaction of anger based on your preference not being delivered. Most likely, if the belief in personal doership is still in place, that anger will be not just anger, but infused with blame. And depending on how developed the framework is, these narratives in relation to any situation at any point in time in your life, if we find ourselves worried about the future, the thought might arise, my happiness, my contentment, what I'm really looking for is not to be found in the flow of life. So what it's saying, that is reminding us that what we're really looking for is peace of mind. And that peace of mind is the absence of expectation, the absence of attachment to outcome, which means the absence of looking for things in the future and believing that to be where my happiness. So if we're worried about an outcome, in that moment, a thought can arise when awareness lands on the worry and says, that's me creating the old mistake that assumes that my sense of self is dependent on something that happens in the future. And so if we're not equipped with a framework that can pick up anything that is happening in the moment and see it for what it is, see it for what the framework describes it as, if we don't have that framework, we simply can't see a thought about the future as suffering, for example, because no one's told us that thinking about the future is suffering. So what will happen is we're thinking about the future. It's normal. We've been doing it our whole life. And what do we have? We have nothing other than the experience of the uncomfortableness that comes with thinking about the future. And we might register that uncomfortableness, but not understand that it can end, not understand that there is another way. And so the narratives that are part of the ending or the changing just don't arise. And if we have been equipped with those descriptions, they start coming up. So the two that are most relevant, because I think most relevant because they essentially are the broadest. They apply to everything. It's three really, but the first is a general principle, which the other two are related to. And that general principle is, what are we really looking for in life? In other words, what will really satisfy us? What is enlightenment all about? So Ramesh had said this is very important, this question. What are we really looking for? And because when Ramesh was seeking, he realized this was an important thing to be clear on. So he asked his guru, what will I have after liberation or after enlightenment that I don't have before? And apparently that was, too forward a question within the tradition that this guru was in. And so he sort of took that as a impertinent question and didn't answer the question, was almost going to get angry, and then gave an answer that Ramesh said is an answer you give when you don't really give an answer. And that answer was, when you're enlightened, you'll know. Which I can understand from a certain perspective. Valid. It's the perspective that is trying to get us to stop having expectations and thinking about things and to just drop into presence. So it's valid to some extent, but it isn't the path or the process that says, hey, we do have a part of the intellect that can be very useful in the seeking. And yes, eventually the intellect itself is going to have to realize that peace of mind is the stopping of the very intellect that is useful. And so it's the intellect itself that realizes, I have to stop. We're looking for is peace of mind. And that is the point in putting forward all of the descriptions, so that eventually the intellect understands that what the human is looking for is peace of mind, and peace of mind is the stopping of a whole lot of, including ultimately seeking. And so then the intellect starts to stop, because it has learned that that is where what the human is looking for is to be found, in the stopping of the intellect itself. And that needs to come as an insight. So this is a key part of the teaching. Ramesh knew it was an important question to ask, and he knew he wanted a good answer. And so he said, now I give a good answer to people. And so if someone asked, and when people didn't ask, he'd say, look, the question you should ask is, what am I really looking for? What will I have? Not what am I looking for because we might be confused and we might be looking for something that's not really what we should be looking for, and yet we are looking for it because we're confused. So what he means in asking the question of what are you really looking for is not what do you happen to be looking for, because the irony is that life has sort of shaped us in a way that we're looking for the wrong thing. And this is why we need to ask the question, what should I be looking for? And also, so we don't get caught into what should, as in give me a rule. What should I be looking for means, what is it that will really satisfy the human being? Because really that's, and not satisfy in terms of necessarily the gaining of something. We assume that satisfy and satisfaction comes with getting something, success or finishing a job, or fame or money, or and so the satisfying needs to be defined also. What are we really looking for? And so the short answer is, we're looking for peace of mind. And peace of mind needs to be defined, because if we don't define these things, we'll have an idea that is very much linked to the psychological self, because the psychological self has all of these ideas about life. And we can't let our definitions that come from that part of our conditioning roll into our spiritual seeking, or what happens is the spiritual seeking essentially becomes contaminated with the beliefs, the old way of living life, and that's the doership and attachment sneaking in the back door. So that's inevitably going to happen. But if we have some good conceptual descriptions and explanations of what the terminology is really pointing at, that means that if it happens, there's a good chance that it's going to get seen and get cut off. So what are we looking for? We're looking for peace of mind, and peace of mind is not the gaining of something, right? It sounds like, well, peace of mind sounds very good. If we get peace of mind, I've got it. I have got peace of mind that I didn't have before. It's very important that you look at peace of mind and see that it is the absence of what we had before. It is the turning down of the volume. So if you look at suffering as a type of noise, peace of mind is the lowering of the noise. And so when the noise is lowered and we can go, now I have silence. And when we look at what silence is just the absence of the noise. So have you gained silence? From one perspective, we can say, yes, we didn't have silence, and now we have silence. And so with silence, because it's something that we're familiar with in the world of form, it's a good analogy to use, where peace of mind is in principle the same. It is the turning down of the noise of uncomfortableness with oneself that arises in the form of guilt and blame and pride and worry and expectation. And guilt, blame, and pride are primarily based on the foundation of the belief in personal doership. I am the orchestrator. I am the doer of that action. And if it's a good action, I have to be proud. I am the doer, and that the action was good and the outcome is good. And if what I do as the orchestrator, as the owner, as the creator, the doer of an action delivers pain and delivers a negative outcome, then I have to be ashamed and feel guilty of my doing. And if we see ourselves as the doer in this way, and we feel proud for the good actions and we feel ashamed and guilty for the bad actions, then we're bound to see the other as the orchestrator, the doer, the one with volition, the one with free will. And we're going to blame them for the actions that happen through them that deliver pain and bad outcomes. And we're going to attribute responsibility to them for the good actions and envy them or compare ourselves to them. So this belief in personal doership automatically breeds guilt and shame, blame, and envy and pride. And the expectation and the worry is based on the idea that my completeness and happiness is dependent on things working out. So once again, we are convinced that I will feel good when I get something, instead of seeing that the contentment, the spiritual goal, if there is such a thing as a goal, is not more than we have, but it's just for a certain way of the human functioning to quieten down. And then we find that given our circumstance, whatever it is, even if we there are plenty of things that can be improved on a circumstantial level. There is a complete change on an internal level that we never realized was separate from the circumstance. Because it's all, the uncomfortable is an attitude, and it's an attitude towards circumstance. And because it's an attitude towards circumstance, the attitude and the circumstance get enmeshed together, and it all just seems circumstantial. Whereas in fact, it's the attitude to the circumstance. And so when that attitude and the circumstance separate, and an attitude of doership and attachment to outcome fall away, it becomes very clear it was never about the circumstance. And it felt like it was about the circumstance because there was a certain attitude, a certain identity, a certain sense of who I am and sense of self that felt uncomfortable. So in a sense, the seeking is at least as it was for me, is a 2 or even a 3 activity type of job. And as long as we know that these 3 different activities exist, we don't need to pick and choose. We just need to allow whichever one feels right to take its place. Well, we could even say there's 4 activities. The fourth is when none of the sort of useful seeking activities are happening, and it's where we are lost and no action of the 3 I'm going to talk about. Obviously, that can happen. And that's when I say it's not valid. It is valid in the scheme of things, because our seeking benefits from the suffering. We learn from the suffering. The movements that tend to interfere most and bring about change, are the contemplation, which means a simultaneous or shortly after, while it's happening, or after the fact, framing whatever is happening in terms of the concepts in the framework. This is pain in the moment. This is suffering. This is suffering in the form of blame. This is where I'm worried about the future, having forgotten that what I'm really looking for is peace of mind. So that narrative is one movement that can arise and is very beneficial. The other is the movement of witnessing or resting in I am, resting in being, where we're not really interested in categorizing and labeling and assessing it, even if it's relative to the working mind, or the contemplating mind. In witnessing, we leave all of that for the times when the contemplating is happening. In witnessing, it's just about allowing everything to be as it is and being interested in the whole, the experience, the visual, the sound, the taste, the smells, the thinking, the emotions, and watching it all as if you are no longer on the stage as a participant in life, where life is happening to you, but rather there's an aspect of yourself, which is the awareness aspect, that has moved into the audience, essentially. I'm using the metaphor of a theater, and is watching everything that is happening on the stage, now uninvolved, and watching from a spectator or a bystander point of view, where obviously the body may still be active, although at first the witnessing tends to happen when the body doesn't have much to do, so it's just sitting back, could be at a cafe or sitting on a park bench, and just watching what is happening as a big dance of life, like a postcard, a visual postcard, a multi-sensory postcard. And you might even start to see emotions of the human being, thinking of the human being from this perspective of being essentially beyond the human being and the world of form, and being that which is aware of all of that. And that is more in line with what I will talk about next, which is what I started off talking about at the beginning, which is connecting to self, connecting to the core essence or awareness that has been overlooked, overshadowed, and covered up by a certain functioning of the human being. So in dropping into being, dropping into I am, resting as the self, abiding in I am, the emphasis on thinking about guilt and blame and reframing anything that is happening in terms of the concepts, that's not part of it, really. It might happen sometimes in meditation, but primarily it's about just dropping deeper, even deeper than the contemplating mind or the working mind. So there's a time and a place for both witnessing and resting in I am, and there's a time and a place for reframing whatever is happening in terms of the concepts, and also expanding the concepts so that they become understood. Oh, that's what's meant. I've never looked at it from that angle, where our own thinking expands it and sees it from and puts some of the pieces together. That's all in the contemplating process. The third, which I won't speak about much today, very valid aspect. So in witnessing, we're not interested in the details, really. We're just interested in seeing if all of the details are the whole. And so what we're really appreciating is the whole of what's happening. And remember, in life, the whole includes the good and the bad, the ugly and the pretty, the wealth and the poverty, the loud noise and the beautiful sounds. The whole cacophony is the whole. And as that which is aware in the audience, we might notice that painful things that are painful to the human being are taken less personally. They sort of mean less when they're happening, and what we are is that in the audience, just watching the show. The third movement that is valid is the movement of feeling the suffering in all of its intensity, and not bringing in any spiritual concepts, not bringing in any witnessing, and just surrendering to the fact that in this moment there is an energy, a load in the system of shame, for example, or hopelessness, or blame, or anxiety, or boredom, and not trying to conceptualize it away, not trying to witness it away, but to really feel it and allow it to take over and become completely unenlightened. So, we tend to be afraid of allowing these energies of suffering to fully express, because we're on a mission of enlightenment, and the concepts have told us that, blame, hatred is all part of the psychological identity. So when that starts to arise, we tend to want to suppress it and not acknowledge it, because it's a sign of my unenlightenment. And the irony is that being able to understand that that's an energy in the system that needs to have its space, needs to be atoned and expressed, and in that we will be releasing the pressure in the system. We will see things that will then become part of the food for the contemplating. We'll remember intensity of the hatred, and then be able to frame it in relation to the belief of personal doership and see how that was intertwined with a memory and an energetic load of a past event, etc. So if we don't hear about these three different movements, and let's say we only get told about witnessing and say that's what it's all about, then these other very valid parts of the process that all key in to each other, we could look at it as a trilogy, are assumed to be unhelpful, and we'll criticize maybe other people that do it. We won't do it because, rolling into feeling and just really feeling the suffering is the opposite of witnessing in a way. And so if we've been told witnessing is what it's all about, the opposite of witnessing hardly seems like it's helpful. So now that that's been put into context, mind you, the fact that I said I found myself looking at whatever was happening with this attitude or reframing it in terms of the conceptual framework, and then at other times just dropping into being. Just because I've described it doesn't mean it's going to happen for you because you say, oh, yes, that's what I'm going to do from now on. Because it happens if it's destiny. It happens if the system is structured in a way that allows it to happen. The talking about it, because that's new conditioning, that becomes part of your up-to-date conditioning. The talking about it may well be part of it such that does happen. And so the whole point here is not to tell you, oh, this is how you should approach it as the doer, where you say, oh, I was told it has to be like this, so I'm going to make it happen. Because the core principle in the teaching is that that's not how life works. That's the false sense of self. So what is described is something that may happen. It happened, in my case, that this body-mind organism found itself reading, listening, absorbing concepts, and then an automatic movement of assessing the situation in line with the concepts, or reframing what was happening in line with the concepts happened. So if it doesn't happen, just look at it as destiny. If you find yourself seeking 25% of the time, and then the rest of the time life is about life and is not related back to what's described in your 25% of seeking, well, that's just how it is. That's destiny. And if that attitude comes in and says, that's destiny, what to do? That's a pretty good sign, because that's the attitude of non-doership. And so if it doesn't come in and we say, why can't I bring this attitude into more of life in general, then that's the opposite of the attitude of non-doership, and it's not your doing, it's a happening. So before we explore the inner space, which is often referred to as the self-awareness, I am, God, the truth, the non-conceptual, the unconditioned. I'll explain from my perspective what happens and why that gets covered up. And it's really quite simple. It's, well, as an explanation, it seems simple, is that the baby gets formed according to the magical blueprint that's put in place when the sperm and the egg come together, and a growing happens. And at some point, there we have it. Out pops the baby. And we could say it's pretty much a blank canvas. And as part of the development after the baby is born, the development of the intellect is an immense and very vital part of the human development. And when we look at that process, and especially if we look at it from a non-doership point of view, we see that there is the machine of the brain, which is essentially a learning machine. And how it learns is by receiving the feedback of the present moment experience and learning from that experience. And it learns through patterns, through recognizing patterns and forming correlations. And what we see is that the intellect and the emotional intelligence, the baby as a whole, develops through experience. And what that means is that the intellect that is needed to recognize patterns, needed to assess and to form conclusions and to draw correlations, the intellect is continually being called on in that development process. So essentially, we say that a baby is very present often. To some extent, that's true because the psychological identity hasn't been formed yet. However, at the same time, when we look at how things get formed, we have to sort of conclude that a baby is working extremely hard all the time because it is developing. And when we look at this developing, it is a matter of pattern recognition and drawing conclusions and seeing correlations. So a good example of this is a baby understanding what its name is, and understanding what a mother is and what the word mother is. And it recognizes faces. So it sees the same face, several different, similar, recurring faces, the mother and the father. And through repetition of experience, it says the person must be significant. And then the mother appears at the same time as it gets food. And so it concludes that the mother is a source of food, and the mother is a source of affection, and the father is sort of like the backup for these things, but he messes things up more than the mother does. And this is what relationship is. It's formed based on absorbing patterns. And this is happening with language. When you think about it, it's an amazing thing, is that it's just about being exposed to language. And at some point, the human being starts being able to use language. Same with walking and crawling. They start off by crawling, and then the motor skills form in a sort of similar way through figuring out the balance of the body and muscles strengthen. The whole thing is about trial and error and repetition and learning what works and what doesn't work. And so the intellect is called on all of the time. So life and the intellect, experience and the intellect get intermeshed. And so the human condition is a condition where whenever anything is happening, the intellect gets called on to tell the human what this is all about in the way that it always has from the very young age, as part of the development process. Because the system doesn't know there's any other way, and so it keeps implementing the same way that got set in place, which needed to get set in place in order for this to be formatted. So we're forced to function the way that evolution puts in place. And we can't look back and say, oh, I wish evolution put something else in place. Because if evolution didn't do that, we wouldn't get a formatted hardware. That is the way that the hardware gets formatted. The problem is that it's a two-edged sword. The formatting is beneficial. It allows us to learn very important skills in order to function as a functional human being, but it also sets in place a way of creating the experience that is enmeshed with thinking. And we basically don't know life free of thought. We don't know life except as it is lived through the image that has got set up as part of that development process. So what has happened is a sense of self that has been set in place that is very much dependent on the world of form, because it's the world of form that has consistently appeared in front of us as our experience in the moment from the day we were born, and it is the world of form that all of the correlations and the patterns were patterns of the world of form. So what exists in the world of form is the body and the emotions and the thinking. And so all of our sense of self is based on as it presents in the world of form. Spiritual seeking is trying to tell us that there is an aspect of the human being that is not of the world of form. And that because we've drawn these conclusions about who we are based on the world of form, the aspect of the human being that is not form-like hasn't been included in our sense of who we are. So I'm going to suggest some very small things that may allow us to drop out of the world of form into the world of the formless, not hopefully without contaminating the world of the formless with the world of form, which is so easy to do if it's not made clear that there is the world of form and there is the formless. And at certain times, we need to investigate the formless and become familiar with the formless. And in doing so, what we're doing is we're equipping our awareness, our understanding of ourself with a very vital recognition of what we've always been, but what hasn't been included in our understanding of ourselves, because it just hasn't been picked up. We've picked up the thoughts and the feelings and the body and the pleasures and pains our whole life. We've been picking that all the time, up all the time. And so this sense of who we are is very one-sided. And so I hope this is a simple, clear explanation that starts to get us, enables us to see, wow, maybe I have a very warped sense of self that is disconnected from aspects of myself that are very much there, that have never been appreciated. So we're going to try and bump into them so that we can appreciate them. And if we bump into them and appreciate them and rest there, we become familiar with them, with aspects of them, of ourself that have been overlooked. So using the senses can be a doorway into this deeper aspect of our self. Because what happens is when we close our eyes, we can very easily go off into what I'm going to call the castle in the sky. The Huda Gurus have a song called Castle in the Sky, and I think it's got something to do with getting caught up in conceptual thinking, and knowing oneself based on thought, and realizing how easy it is to go into a world of thought, a world of form, because thought is a type of form. So if we talk about meditating, we talk about close your eyes, what happens, unless what I'm speaking about now is introduced, as soon as we close our eyes, instead of presence happening, there is a propensity to go into a world of thinking and not realize that that is a problem, because that's what's always happened. And so if we wonder why meditation doesn't seem to have a quality that is described by teachings, this can be the reason, because our meditating may actually have been closed eyes, sure, but then suddenly off into the world of thinking, where we even essentially drag the world of form and create a room of form and memories and meditate in that room, which means we're not really meditating. We're swimming around in another world of form. And meditation is when it starts to deliver real results, it's swimming around in the world of the formless. So I wanted to throw that in to hopefully avoid the problem that we don't see as a problem, because we've never called it out for what it is. And that is where we say, okay, I'm going to close our eyes for meditation. And without realizing, we go into a room of thought. We create a conceptual world of form. And we might think it's not a world of form because we say, well, there aren't any tables and chairs there. There is just my thinking. But thought is of the world of form. So that's very important to know. So meditation is an exploration of the inner world, which is not the world of form, not the world of time, not the world of causality, not the world of past and a future, not the world of outcomes, not the world of human being with a body and with emotions. It's the inner world. And we just need to become familiar with that. So another little tip that can help the presence, essentially, which really means to drop into the world of the formless. The more into the world of the formless we are, meaning the less of the world of form that comes into it, the more present we are. And in presence, what we might appreciate is the essence of who we are that has always been in the daily waking state. We'll realize that when we bump into it in the world of form. And the personality and all of the world of form has wrapped itself around that formless essence to create essentially a combination, a package. But what is known, what is but what is most important in order for us to have the experience of even the world of form is the presence of the formless consciousness and the awareness. So it makes sense that if that's such an important part of life, that we start being able to know that it's part of life, because it is. So we need to appreciate it. So in order for that to happen, we need to explore the inner space and become aware of that aspect without the world of form first. So to take us into that space, first pick an object in the world of form and look at it with the sense of sight. And so I suggest that you do this while I'm talking. A lot of people, because of the thinking and going into the castle in the sky, while I'm talking about so if I say close your eyes, they're listening to me say close your eyes, and they don't close their eyes. So you don't have to close your eyes, but when I say close your eyes, maybe close your eyes. Because it's about really experiencing it. So first, we're going to use the sense of sight to bring us out of thinking. So you can look at a tree or a table or a chair and really register it as an object that you are looking at. And in looking at it, and the more detail that you look at, the fine patterns, the different colors, shape, the more you are really looking at that object. And if you find yourself drifting off into some thinking, then use that sense of sight to really come back to the thing itself there, where you don't really need to think about the thing. You just need to, you allow yourself to see that the sense of sight sees the object, and that thinking is not required for sight to operate. It just means presence. It means bringing your attention to the faculty of sight. And now that you're looking at that object and you sort of know where it is relative to the body, at maybe two meters away from you, I suggest closing your eyes. And in order for us not to go into this world of form, with your eyes closed, still look at where the tree or the chair was that you were looking at, but with your eyes closed. And look at where the chair was with your eyes closed. And still use the sense of sight. So bring your attention back to the sense of sight and look with your eyes closed. And what you might see is what's there. Remembering how easy it is to go into a room of concepts, a conceptual world, which is why when we close our eyes, we looked with the eyes at where the tree was, the chair was, and now we are seeing with the faculty of sight what is there. What we might see is that what is there is not a world of form, but a world of the formless. So you might see, so when looking at the tree or where the tree or chair was, you might start off by saying, oh, I'm looking at the back of my eyelids. That's fine. Look at the back of your eyelids or look at where the tree or the chair was. And as you're looking at that, you might then realize if you drop the insistence that that's the back of your eyelids and you just look at what is being seen, you could see that it's a vast, spaceless space, black and shimmering white, or maybe white with lots of shimmering black on it. But there are no corners, there are no edges, there are no boundaries. And if you notice, there is no body looking, there is no physical body, because the physical body is largely made up of the senses. So if we're looking at what is really there, do we see any visual of a physical body? And what we might realize is how often when we go into this castle in the sky, this conceptual room, we bring in a residual self-image of the one sitting, meditating. And if we don't ever realize that that is a residual self-image from my experience of 2 minutes ago or 5 minutes ago, my experience of what has been registered of life in the past, the last 20 years, 40 years, 50, 60 years, whatever. So if it's not pointed out to us, we close our eyes and we go off into a castle in the sky. So close our eyes and see with the sense of sight and be aware of sight and what you see, and you realize, oh, there's nothing, there's this vast emptiness. And there's no body. You can even bring in the sense of sound. And what you'll notice with the sense of sound is that the sound is still from the world of form. So then flick back to the sight, which is actually not seeing any form. You might find that you can dissolve into that space. And if you drop the notion of even the sense of sight as a sense faculty, what you might realize is this vast space and what we started off calling the sense of sight is actually the background awareness that is primary to all of the senses. So far in the meditation, we've transcended the senses, starting off by recognizing the awareness by first utilizing the sense of sight and seeing and looking as the doorway into the present, into presence, to prevent us from going into this castle in the sky. And so when we go into the castle in the sky, we aren't aware of the formless space. We're thinking about an email that needs to be written. We're thinking about what we're going to do for the shopping, what we're going to buy, all of our to-dos. And so that is bringing, when that's happened, we're bringing the world of form into the world of the formless, which really means it's not the world of the formless anymore, it's the world of form. And this meditation, the resting in self, is an exploration of the world of the formless. So if there's anyone trying to do anything, even, the seeing, so if there's some insistence on making it happen, that's essentially the world of form coming into the world of formless. It was very effortless to look at the chair, the faculty of sight, which really I'm suggesting maybe more the faculty of awareness rather than the faculty of sight, registered the chair. Didn't have to work hard at it. If you misinterpreted and thought, oh, you have a job where you have to see all the details and you have to keep seeing more and more details and keep telling yourself you haven't seen enough details, and then the world of thinking had come into seeing the chair. If you just look at the chair, you realize that the details pop out because they're in the field of awareness. So you close your eyes, you bring attention to the space and realize that maybe I'm in direct contact with awareness. And when we realize there's no one looking, so the residual self-image of the body and someone meditating is transcended because we are so present with the formless, then the direct feedback might be, I am the looking. And now when we use the word looking, it's more in relation to the background of awareness. So I am the awareness. And some teachings will use the word, the awaring is happening. It's not, there isn't someone aware. There is just awareness happening, and the awareness is intrinsic and not separate and at no distance from this vast open space of the world of the formless. So you haven't gone anywhere. You haven't been transported to a new dimension, because when we put it that way, it sounds like, oh, the human being of form has been transported into the dimension of the formless. What's really happened is that a dropping into the deeper dimension of who we are and knowing ourselves as that, as the formless, is what's happened. So you can look at it as, oh, this is my inner space. This is the presence. See, so your inner essence, the depth, the quantum aspect, which really means this is pointing out the formless, it doesn't think. It doesn't have anywhere to go, anything to achieve. And it is complete. So if it's resting in itself, it's like, oh, I am. I don't need to become. And so that is what we are, because we've just dropped into the depth of who we are. So that is the part of ourself that doesn't know itself as incomplete, because when we look at the feeling of incompleteness and needing to gain things, and that is all on the world of form and thought. When we drop out of that, there's no problem. There is no sense of what is the purpose, or doubt, or despair. If there is, it's because the world of form has come into that space, which is inevitable. And maybe when that's seen, if we have the rule that says it feels uncomfortable because the world of form has snuck in, just refocus, bring yourself out of that room of concept, that castle in the sky, come back, use the sense of sight to look at where the tree was or the chair was and see the vast formless space. Remember that any thought of a human being doing meditation, sitting in a room, that's bringing the world of form in. So meditation in a way is a bit like unclenching your fist. Actually, that sounds cliched. It sounds like I've heard it recently. But it's a good analogy, is that we're so used to holding on tight that when someone suggests let go, the only movement we know is to tighten, and we say, am I letting go? And they say, no, you're doing the opposite. Try letting go. So you tighten even harder. Go, have I let go now? And they say, no, you're holding on tighter than ever. Why don't you just let go? And so try again. You tighten even harder. And you say, am I letting go now? Because that's the movement that we know. We know how to think. We know how to get somewhere, to produce, because all of that, that's all on the world of form. So in the world of the formless, it's a backward roll, which is the letting go. So essentially, it is becoming, we sink, we melt deeper into being that vast, spaceless space that is aware. What I mean by aware is when we were looking at where the tree or the chair was, and then we see, with the looking, we see this vast open space, and then we realize there is no body there. There is just the space, and the space is aware. In that awareness, we might become aware of the fact And not only is there awareness, but there is the undeniable, this is a very important part of the self, important part of the meditation. There is an undeniable sense of existence, which really means I exist. But because we're in the world of the formless, we haven't brought in, and there isn't any experience of I as I've always known myself. So I exist is referring to the formless aware space that intrinsically, as part of what that is, as well as awareness, there is the sense of existence. The sense of existence it's both awareness and the sense of existence are not something to think about, but something to feel when we are that space. So if I said, are you dead? If the space were to refer to itself directly, to know itself, it says, I can't acknowledge that there is death here. What there is existence. So what exists is very undefined. It's like, I've put a couple of words on it, awareness, what you truly are, but they're sort of just labels pointing us to what is there for us to be. And this depth of who we are is just a closing of your eyes away. It's always the background, the essence, the inner depth. So, if you miss an aeroplane or a bus and suddenly the narrative kicks in, it's all about the world of form, right? There's no sense, no connection to the formless, to the depth of who we are. So maybe you find closing eyes happens, focusing on the back of the eyelids where the tree and the chair were, and looking with the sense of sight, and then realizing that what you're looking at is not form, it's formless, and then realizing that it's not even the sense of sight, but the awareness behind the sense of sight. That there is no form there is no one there, that all there is this all-encompassing space, that it sweeps over itself. And you are it. I am. Who cares about missing the bus? So who cares about missing the bus is the thinking of the world of form. And in time, this connection, this knowing yourself as the formless can come into daily living where both the world of form and the connectedness to the formless coexist, and the preciousness of the formless starts to pervade daily living, starts to pervade the world of form. And that's because we start to know ourselves in a more integral way. We start to know ourselves as a human being that has both a form and a formless aspect that coexist and are two sides of the one coin, let's say, two facets of a diamond. They work in harmony together to create the happy experience of the human being. The happy experience of the human being is an experience where we feel connected, we feel like we're being lived, we find that the uncomfortableness of the psychological identity that got formed because we only knew ourselves on the world of form has fallen away. And it's a process that happens gradually as we become more and more familiar with the world of the formless, waking up and recognizing the world of the formless. When it happens, it can happen in many different ways. Some people, it happens in a very pronounced way, where a coming out of the conceptual world, which, believe it or not, is our experience, that gets formed. It doesn't seem like a conceptual world. It seems like it's a world of actual experience, of actual, of reality. And it's only when we drop out of the world of form do we realize that there is another way of knowing ourselves, a direct way. So in seeing that for the first time, the contrast can be, really significant. And that is what is described as instantaneous or spontaneous realization. It's not, as far as I would say, it's not liberation or enlightenment. It's part of the movement towards knowing oneself in an integral way, where you do get to live in daily life free of suffering, and living in daily life free of suffering is the freedom, the enlightenment, the liberation. So what is often referred to as, I saw my true self, and what's seen can't be unseen, and it happened spontaneously, and it had nothing to do with concepts, because obviously you're shifting into the world of the formless, and concepts need to be left behind. And so that's described, and that's the awakening, which is different to grounded, stabilized liberation from suffering. But it's very significant, because the doorway, the backward roll, the unclenching happen. And it's very similar to, being at a massage or a relaxation workshop or therapy, and the instruction is, relax your shoulders or relax your jaw. And you think, I am relaxing my shoulders. And then something is said and it clicks, or something is pushed, or they put their hands and lower your shoulders, and you realize, oh, I wasn't relaxing my shoulders. But you thought you were, because the tension was your norm. And we don't realize that we're not relaxing our shoulders. And when it happens, it's like, then we realize, oh, I wasn't relaxing my shoulders, or I was clenching my jaw. And they say, stop clenching your jaw. I go, I'm not clenching my jaw. Until the jaw clenching stops, then you realize, oh, my jaw was clenched. So if it doesn't happen, It just means that the psychological structure is intense. And so in that moment, it's not destined to happen. And maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. Approach it with a relaxedness, because approaching it with I need it to happen today is more of the clenched jaw.